Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World, where we bring you the best business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Don Arliff. Donald Trump once famously said that he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Now he concedes that it's going to be tougher than he initially thought. What's important is that the wheels have been set in motion. But the question is, how is Ukraine going to fare economically once the war ends? John Kennedy has the details.
After U.S. President Donald Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, followed by a visit from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office on Monday, hopes are rising that peace between Russia and Ukraine may be on the horizon. Although the details of a potential agreement remain unclear, it seems nearly certain that Ukraine will be forced to give up some of its territory. This would most likely include areas currently occupied by Russia. The Donetsk and Luhansk regions, home to mines, heavy industry and agriculture, along with Zaporizhia, once an energy hub and a window towards the Azov Sea, the agricultural Kherson region, as well as the Crimean Peninsula. One recent blow to Ukraine's economy has been the Battle of Pokrovsk, which forced the closure of a major coke and coal mine that powered the country's steel industry. On the other hand, experts note that losing access to coal could accelerate the shift toward clean energy development.
Now, Ukraine has to switch to a more renewable energy production because it wouldn't have access to Donbas region with its rich coal and other resources. So I see the huge potential in energy industry.
While overall commodity exports fell from $68 billion in 2021 to around $42 billion in 2024, Ukraine has shown strong resilience. Some products like iron ore or sugar have already managed to recover or even surpass pre-war levels.
A trade of agricultural products, it goes through the Danube ports and also the Odessa region ports, through neighboring countries, and plus the railroad capacity to transport the agricultural products, it also increased.
A potential ceasefire agreement would also give new momentum to Ukraine's EU accession talks, which the Polish Economic Institute estimates could boost its war-torn economy by up to 26% within 2 to 3 years of accession.
Pulling it off would be quite challenging. However, it does not account for all the foreign direct investment as well. And it could push the growth higher. So even if you look at our more conservative scenarios, you still see gains of around 6-7%, or at least, even if in the most pessimistic one, 1 to 2%.
Experts say one of the main growth engines driven by FDI could be arms production.
Ukraine will become the main hub for military production for Europe as well, having such a rich experience in the active war and being able to test the new military equipment on the front line.
But even if Ukraine reclaimed some of its lost territories, the damage inflicted by the war wouldn't allow it to fully capitalize on the land's economic potential.
I wonder how much agricultural activity you can indeed have in that swath of land that goes along the north coast between Dnipro and Azov Sea, considering the amount of mines, drones activities, and so on out there, and also problem with irrigation. Since Kakhovka Dam was exploded, the canals that were delivering water to that area gone dry.
Even so, with a fifth of its territory under enemy control, Ukraine's economy could return or even surpass its pre-war size this year, if all goes well.
To discuss economic performance of a post-war Ukraine, we need some assumptions. The borders are frozen on the current front lines, so Ukraine loses 20% of its territory. This includes the industrial production, natural resources, and agriculture in the lost territories. A population loss of between 3.5 to 7 million in the occupied territories. In addition, 5.1 million people are registered as refugees in the European Union. It is still unknown how many will return to their homeland. For the sake of this discussion, we'll also assume that Ukraine has robust security guarantees. Now, to speculate about the potential for the Ukrainian economy post-war and to what extent it can thrive, I'm joined by Benjamin Hilgenstock, senior economist at the KSE Institute, a think tank within the Kyiv School of Economics. Benjamin, hello, and thank you so much for joining us on The Bottom Line.
My pleasure. Good to be back.
Yes. Now, despite 11 years of war and 3 years since the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian economy continues to function. Assuming an end to hostilities and a resumption of normal economic life, what would you predict for the Ukrainian economy?
That's indeed a very good question. So let's take the assumptions that you outlined. So in our baseline scenario, Ukraine's economy will grow at something between 4 and 5% in real terms every year once the full-scale war actually ends. That means the economy will return to its kind of post-war, so 2021 state by the end of the decade, basically. This, of course, requires an inflow of investment, foreign direct investment for the most part. But of course, it also dependent on the partial return of refugees to the country after.
Right. So indeed, that will be important. Now, before the war, Ukraine was a steel production powerhouse. With the loss of the territories in the east, Pokrovsk coking coal mine being one of the casualties in destruction of the biggest steel plants, of course. Can and will Ukraine rebuild this industry?
I think the Ukrainian economy after the war is going to look fundamentally different than before the war, but I think it's important to emphasize that a lot of this adjustment has already taken place. The territories that you mentioned and the industries there are currently not under Ukrainian control, so they don't contribute to the Ukrainian economy. Nevertheless, the economy has begun to rebound after the initial shock from the war in 2022, and this will continue. But again, the economy is going to look different than it did before the war, for sure.
Now, what about the broader industry? Is it adapted to the wartime economy? How has the shift in production, say, for instance, within that industry? I still want to just talk about this because there is still quite a bit of steel coming out of Ukraine.
Yeah, that is true. I have to admit that is not actually my core area of expertise. But again, Ukraine's economy, including these sectors, have proven to be quite resilient with a relocation of production and a reorientation of production and export markets. This is presumably going to continue. But again, everything is dependent on when this war actually ends and how much investment into these sectors is going to occur afterwards, because while the war still rages on, there's simply a hesitancy of foreign investors and domestic investors to put capital into the economy as a whole. And also, the state has to redirect large shares of its funding for defense and security rather than investing in human capital and investment.
Certainly. Well, and on that note, domestic arms manufacturing supplies a significant portion of Ukraine's defense needs. From January to July of 2025, it's come up all the way to 71.4%. Now, for comparison, from January to July in 2024, this figure stood at 44.1%. So could this sector significantly expand, and especially considering the needs of Europe for procurement?
I think the defense industry is really one of the sectors that will shape the future of the Ukrainian economy. And as you mentioned, Europe is rearming. Europe is spending very large amounts of money on rearming and effective deterrence against Russia, and will have to do so for many years to come. And of course, Ukraine has an expertise in arms manufacturing and producing of battlefield-ready technology that most other European countries and European defense companies do not have. So I see this as a tremendous opportunity actually for both sides, the Ukrainian side as well, the Europeans who need to figure out what exactly they want to spend all of this money on to rearm.
Do you think the industry is somewhat shifting in that matter? Is it possible or likely that this is something that can be, I guess, very well expanded?
It certainly can. The fact of the matter is simply that right now Ukraine needs everything that it produces for its defense against the Russian invasion. So once this war is over, we can start talking about scaling up production for exports to other European countries. But that is really the precondition. I don't think anyone can expect Ukraine's defense industry to shift to this stance while the war is still going on.
Right. But in the aftermath of the war, I imagine that the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine will still continue. Ukraine will have to rearm. It'll have to bolster its defenses to create deterrence so that it's never invaded again.
Yeah, they certainly will, no matter what these security guarantees are that you mentioned at the onset of our conversation and that are currently, fortunately, being discussed in Europe and with the United States. But Ukraine will have to take care of its own defense and security needs. And that means we shouldn't expect both spending on these issues to drop back to, say, normal or pre-full-scale invasion levels. And that also, of course, applies to the orientation of the Ukrainian defense industry, with the advantage that it will be producing weaponry and spending money on weaponry that is not immediately destroyed on the battlefield. But for sure, the Russian threat will not go away, especially if this peace agreement that you outlined looks the way you described it. The threat will remain. Ukraine will need to stay prepared. And that, of course, means that things cannot return to normal anytime soon.
Ukraine's total exports almost halved since 2021, but the share of agriculture products has risen significantly by 20 percentage points. So agriculture output more or less the same, but less industrial products are being exported. This shows that agriculture actually has become more important to the Ukrainian economy than before the war. But after the war, will this trend be reversed?
Well, as you described, agriculture has become more important because other sectors have shrunk, not because agriculture has grown so much. Of course, the agricultural sector has performed in a very, very robust fashion, given the loss of territory, the loss of arable land, but also the issue of mining and demining needs. But of course, after the war, there is less potential in the agricultural sector to grow than in other sectors simply because it's performing better during the full-scale war.
Now, the country has also been able to plug holes in the budget, mainly due to foreign financial assistance. If the war ends, when can Ukraine stand by itself without any assistance?
That's a very good question. So Ukraine will have elevated defense and security spending needs for the foreseeable future. And I think what we should emphasize here is that this is basically money that is spent not only on Ukraine's defense, but Europe's defense. And hence, Europe should continue to support Ukraine in this endeavor, simply to allow it to not cannibalize the budget for defense and security needs, but at the same time be able to invest in the future of its economy. There's likely going to be a new IMF program for Ukraine sometime soon. There will have likely to be a new macro-financial assistance package from the European Union and some other European countries like the UK. Of course, the needs are much larger if the war continues far into 2026, but even if it ends, we cannot expect Ukraine's budget to just go back to normal. Even if defense and security spending declines, it will still be dramatically larger than in all other NATO countries, including based on the recent Hague Summit spending pledges. And that Ukraine cannot simply do just with its own domestic resources. But again, this is our security that Ukraine is paying for here, and so we should contribute.
Is there any kind of idea of how much foreign assistance the budget, the government in Kyiv is going to need to stay afloat, and for exactly how long?
Well, for exactly how long depends on what happens in the next weeks and months. I'm somewhat skeptical about this peace agreement, but let's leave this aside. The funding that has been provided to Ukraine or is being provided under the existing mechanisms, so the EU's Ukraine facility, the ERA loans scheme based on the proceeds from the frozen Russian assets, but also the IMF program, this was going to be largely sufficient under the assumption that the war was going to end in 2025. If it does not, I think it's fair to say that you're going to have a $20-25 billion budget gap next year easily then if the war continues through 2026, and a similar situation would emerge thereafter. So that's kind of the magnitude of numbers that we're looking at.
Which is quite significant. Now, how about the housing sector and construction? Due to the extent of the damage, will this provide much needed jobs? Will it provide housing for those who have been displaced or who have lost their houses because they've been destroyed? How much do you think the government is expected to participate in this?
That's a very good question. It depends on how much the government actually has available for investments in these things. What I would like to add is that it's not just about the investment into the sector, but also the capacity of the economy to absorb this money and actually build. We should not forget, and you mentioned this at the onset, that millions of Ukrainians have left the country. These are people that are missing in the labor force. So something we should focus on as well when we talk about a robust post-war recovery of the Ukrainian economy. It is also about human capital, including the return of some of the refugees that are currently in other European countries.
Certainly. Now, this war has shown that Russia can grow its economy by waging war and conquering land, while Ukraine lost a fifth of its territory and had to defend itself. And yet this year, GDP will likely reach pre-war levels of about $200 billion per year when compared to 2021. So how is the latter possible? How has it been possible that Ukraine has made such really amazing strides while being under attack at the same time?
So whether Ukraine has reached pre-war levels or not depends a little bit on the metric that you apply. If you look at real GDP and local currency, we're very far from that. But of course, it's true that Ukraine's economy has performed very well. This is about investment in resilience and capacity to adapt. It's about making the energy grid resilient, even in the face of constant Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure. This has allowed Ukraine's economy to continue. And of course, Ukrainians are quite innovative and capable of continuing throughout this war. One thing I would like to add about Russia is, the Russian economy grew quite strongly in 2023 and 24 because of the war stance, because of so much fiscal stimulus. But that is really coming to an end. And the Russian growth model that is basically based on waging war on its neighbor is coming to its limits.
Yeah, there's going to be a time of reckoning. Now, if the war ends within the current front lines, Ukraine will share a land border with Russia in the north, in the east, and in the south, with the very real possibility of a sudden successful attack. Now, do you think foreign investors will stomach an environment such as this?
They will if the security guarantees that are currently being negotiated are robust. Of course, we cannot end up in a situation where Ukraine basically hands over certain additional territories in the Donbass and Russia has basically a free line of attack toward Kiev, and then expect that foreign investors will return to the country. So it very much depends on how exactly these security guarantees look like, and hopefully that will become a little bit clearer in the coming weeks.
Right. Now, final question. We're almost out of time. Could Ukraine become Europe's South Korea or Israel? Advanced economy flourishing despite a very bad neighborhood or bad neighbors?
Well, I think Ukraine is stuck with the bad neighborhood for quite some time. I think there's tremendous potential in the Ukrainian economy. I think there will be, under the assumption of robust security guarantees, I think there will be significant interest from foreign investors. There will be inflows from the private sector, but also public sector partners into the Ukrainian economy, which will lead to a quite robust recovery. And that also means, of course, business opportunities for companies. But it is, to an extent, up to us to create the circumstances and make this happen.
Absolutely. Well, we did jump ahead quite a bit here, but it's always nice to take stock of what the Ukrainian economy has and its potential. Benjamin Hilgenstock, senior economist at the KSE Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
And that concludes this edition of The Bottom Line for today. I was your host, Don Arleth. We bring you the best of regional business Monday to Friday at 5:10 CET here on TVP World. In the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and tvpworld.com. That's it for me for now. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Goodbye.